All right, so this is presentation is called The Landscape of Required Baccalaureate Capstones, a Multinational Study. And we have our research team. I'd like, those 4 of us are here for this presentation. I'd like everyone to introduce themselves. I'm Janet Dean. I am the director of the Institute of Teaching and Learning at the University of Akron, and that's in Ohio, the USA. And my role with Capstones has been largely through our Gen Ed. We did a Gen Ed revision, and I was taking some lead on that. And we're working very hard on getting required capstones for all of our baccalaureate students. Chris.
And I'm Chris Beaudoin, and I'm a faculty member at Grand Valley State University in the Movement Science Department. And I've been the chairperson of the department for the past 9 years. And I teach primarily within our exercise science program. And I have been teaching our capstone for the exercise science majors for the past 6 or 7 years. And the capstone is a requirement within the majors for all students at Grand Valley State University. And David, Janet, do you want to just give a quick overview of David since he's not here?
Yeah, so Dave is at the University of Leeds, and he's actually the big capstone guru in the UK. He works in biosciences, and his university has a required capstone. And his big push has always been to expand what a capstone is. You know, like what the product or the outcome is, and to be more flexible and actually more career-oriented and open for what capstones can be. Carol.
Hey everyone, I am Carol Van Zile-Tamsen from the University of Buffalo. Up until 2 weeks ago, I was the Director of Academic Assessment at UB, and as of July 1st, I'm now the Director of Curriculum Assessment and Teaching Transformation. Our acronym is CAT, and I'm going to say that because you'll probably see my friend Jasper. He can't help himself from joining Zoom meetings. I was a part of our our process to revise our general education program that started around 2011. And as part of that general education program, we were very interested in a general education capstone. And so I was on the implementation committee to put a gen ed capstone in place, and we piloted it. And then I was the coordinator of that capstone for the first 2 years of its existence. And then because we do use that gen ed capstone also as a way to assess general education at UB, I continue to collaborate very strongly with the office that oversees that because we do collect data from the work in that class as a part of our overall general education assessment.
All right, great. Tania.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Tania. I'm from Australia. At the time of this research, I was with the Southern Cross University at the School of Business and Tourism. So apart from this capstone research work, I teach capstones at undergraduate and master's level, and also was involved in a project to undertake an audit of all capstones that we have at our university across all the different disciplines and faculties. As we do not have a capstone requirement, it was just interesting to see how many we actually did actually provide at the time.
All right. So I have a very ambitious agenda for us. I wanted to sort of give you a highlight of what we're going to be doing. So by the end of this, you're going to have a sense of how prevalent institutionally required capstones are in 3 countries, Australia, the UK, and the US. You're going to learn, we've been looking at the language of how these institutions frame capstones and have determined the top 10 themes that we saw in these institutions. You will be comparing your institution's approach to this multinational data. And we are going to actually go through a process of creating our own little informal data set and practicing a sort of rudimentary form of coding so you can understand what our project was like. So I wanted to start off by talking about why we studied institutionally required capstones. we were an unusual group, and when we came together, we realized that 3 of our team had institutionally required capstones at the universities where they taught. And as Tania and I have said, we were very interested in institutionally required capstones, and like how we really believe in this as a high impact practice, and we really hope that all students can have an opportunity to complete a capstone. So really, unless the institution requires it, not all students are going to get it. So for us, this is a question of access. So we decided to look at what are these institutions that are requiring capstones, what are they doing, and how can we better understand how they got to the point where they could share this high impact practice with all of their undergraduate students. So we began with our research questions. We first wanted to know just how many institutions, which institutions in the US, UK, and Australia require a capstone. And then we were looking at the language. That was the second part of our question. So we looked at these institutionally required, the institutional documents to see how they were describing the capstones. So one of the issues with describing or studying capstones is we have to figure out what they are. And we had different language even in our own group. In the UK, they tend to use language like final year project. In Australia, they tend to use the word capstone. In the US, we're kind of all over the place. I've listed some of the possible language here on the screen. And we came up with, when we actually got into our data, we saw a few variations of this, but this generally are the type of language that people use to say what a capstone is. And we were looking at public documents such as undergraduate catalogs, bulletins, graduation requirements, and institutional websites. All right, so our first task was thinking about prevalence. We had to get a data set. So Tania, if you can explain what the data set was for Australia.
Australia is a fairly small country with just around 25 million, and we're serviced by just 42 universities. So for me, it was quite easy to undertake a census, which means look at websites of all these 42 universities or higher education institutions and inspect their public-facing documents. So I think on the next few slides, we've got the results, but that was just basically the approach. So we looked at all Australian universities. Yep, that's right.
Yeah. And it was great. Australia is our really comprehensive data set, in part because obviously they're a smaller country. The UK, Dave looked at the 126 public universities that offered baccalaureate degrees. And so his data set from the UK was 126 public institutions. And Carol, if you can talk about how we got the data set for the US.
Sure. So those of you who are from the US know that we literally have thousands of institutions across the country. So we couldn't possibly have looked at every single institution. So we needed to do a sampling. And we decided that doing around 300 would be reasonable because Janet, Chris, and I could then each take about 100 institutions and do the review. So I pulled the IPEDS data for 2017 and selected out just those institutions that have undergraduate degree programs. So any, and then we further refined to just go to 4-year baccalaureate degrees. And so that weeded out any 2-year undergraduate institutions that only offered associate's degrees. And it also weeded out any professional or graduate schools that did not have undergraduate degrees at all. And this also included historically Black colleges and universities. And then we had an index of the Hispanic serving institutions as well, because we did want to make sure that those minority serving institutions were represented in the data set. And then from the remaining institutions, we made the assumption that the capstone experience might be somewhat dependent upon the accreditation body. Because many institutions are using capstones for assessment, and assessment varies a little bit by accreditation region, and the strictness of the assessment requirements vary by region. So we then divided up the remaining institutions by accreditation body. And then within each of those, we grabbed a proportional sample of institutions and added also Carnegie classification so that we would have proportional numbers of four-year only master's and doctoral institutions as well. So in the end, I think it worked out to be about 325 institutions that were sampled from the United States.
All right, and we were very happy to have Carol because she could do all of that statistical stuff for us. All right, so here are the results, and you can see from this data that institutionally required capstones are actually not that prevalent. In the UK, there were 2 required capstones out of 42. The UK had 5 out of 126, and the USA had quite a bit more proportionally than Australia and the UK. They had 48 out of 331, which was about 15%. So this is where we landed. That our group really was a bit unusual in that 3 of the 5 of us had required capstones at our institutions because they really are not that prevalent. So this just makes them all that more special. So basically we had this group of 55 institutions that had a required capstone. And from there, we went to their public facing documents and looked at how they described it. And the language is just really interesting and very important here. All right, so in this group of 55 institutions that have a required capstone, we found various approaches. They can be offered as a course, an individual or a group project. It can be, the content can be multidisciplinary or, interdisciplinary, disciplinary, multidisciplinary, or integrative. And these last 2 categories only happened in the US. In Australia and the UK, it is definitely a disciplinary focus to the capstones. All right, have a couple of chats, Carol. Are there some questions in the chat or?
Yeah, there was just a question about what we meant by universally required capstones, and that
okay.
All undergraduates must complete a capstone in some form.
Yeah, and actually the way we found that was that you either found it as a requirement in the undergraduate catalog. All right, so this gets to the final approach. It can be required by the major program, and for the purpose of our study, if it's required by the major program, the institution itself is saying to every major, you have to have a capstone. In the US, because we have a general education or core curriculum tradition, the capstone can be required through the general education program. It can either be a freestanding gen ed capstone like the one at Carol's institution where students from all disciplines take the gen ed capstone, or it can be housed in the major but required by the gen ed curriculum. And it was interesting that half of the capstones in the United States in our sample were required through the general education or core curriculum program. And I think that part of that is just a curricular thing that it's easier to probably, as you're revising the gen ed program, to add a requirement for a capstone rather than requiring changing the graduation requirements. All right, so now we're going to move on to, we want to hear about your institutions, and I'm now going to ask you to go to this link. Those of you, Carol's going to put it in the chat. If you can, if you're online, you can just click on that chat, or if you are visual, if you're in person, you can use this bit.ly link. So I'm going to call you back in 5 minutes. I'm going to ask you to think of a capstone that you're familiar with at your institution and describe its purpose and goals. And what we're going to do is have a little mini data set here when we're done. All right, any questions about getting to this? I'll be here waiting. I will. I ask you to keep your mic on because I'll call you back in about 5 minutes. So everybody go to this document and start writing. Chris, looks like you cheated by cutting and pasting your actual description. That's not cheating. That is being thorough.
I
Good
thought that would
job.
be, I thought it would be interesting to share.
Okay, excellent. All right, everyone. Like I see some of you are still writing, but I'd like you to just kind of like scan through some of this and notice any patterns you see or anything interesting that emerges as you're looking at everybody's descriptions. All right, I'm going to ask you guys to come back to our, you can keep, actually, Carol, you want to go ahead and share this? Maybe I'll stop sharing and you can start sharing that screen. All right, so I'd like to open this up for a little discussion of things that you noticed about these descriptions. Anybody want to can raise your hand? Carol, Caroline, do you want to, is anybody in, why don't we get somebody from the in-person to make a comment?
Janet, we have Nancy, Jillian, Tony, and I are in the room.
Okay, great. Does anybody want to say something you've noticed just by looking at these?
It looks to me like there's some difference between some of them being major specific, what you were describing, and others being part of either a general education or university outcome.
Yeah, and see that. All right. Is any language patterns? Anybody want to? Any themes you see emerging? And this isn't really fair for my group because we're so used to doing this. Maybe someone who has not been coding data. Oh, Leslie, do you mind if I call on you? Do you notice anything, Leslie, Cameron?
Hi. No, I was just, I'm just noticing the both here and in our discussions yesterday about the reflection component, and
Good, yeah.
it's not part of ours, and so it's something I'm really interested in hearing more about. How many people have that as part of, even like as a ours is a more like a research paper, so curious to hear about others because it does look like a number of them have it.
Yeah, all right, good. Reflection. All right, good. Anybody else want to throw any words out that are jumping out at you?
I see a lot of integrate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
That's what I was going to add, the integrate and synthesis as well.
I like the Tania's mountaintop culmination experience. I think that's a good metaphor there. All right. Well, let's go back. James?
Yeah, thanks, folks. I'm interested in Carol's because I remember a conversation with Carol in our first or second year at Elon, and I'm wondering, Carol, if you could confirm my memory that you, I think, told me that you have a capstone that's required at the end of sophomore year, at the end of the second year at Buffalo, which helps students sort of take their bearing as to where they're headed in their education. Is my memory correct?
That's correct. So the UB capstone, which is our general education capstone, is the culmination of general education. And the students take it as soon as they complete the majority of their gen ed requirements, they take it. For most students, that will be fall or spring of junior year. So it positions them to sort of take this time, reflect on what they've learned in general education, think about where they're going in their major, and then hopefully it builds that interconstructed knowledge base so that it's a springboard into their major. We do have a few exceptions simply because of the way that some of our high credit majors work. They force students to take it in their sophomore year, certainly with finishing up gen ed, just because when they get into the major, they are so filled with credit hours that they have to get it out of the way sooner. But Students, they're going to take it in the junior year.
All right, great. All right, so what we just did, we gathered, we did a little replication of our research progress. We gathered some statements about capstones, and then we just looked at some emerging trends or patterns of the data. This is exactly what our group did. We got these official statements. We looked at patterns emerging, and they came out very similar to our discussions right there. Like, just I noticed this, I noticed this. There seems to be a lot of integration, or there's reflection, or there's this language that is interesting. And then we came together as a group of 5, and we took these emergent categories and we looked at the instructional statements, and we went through a process of looking through each statement, looking at the categories, consolidating, refining them through a group coding process. And we went through all 55 institutional statements with our research team, and we required consensus of all 5 researchers. And here we are at Elon, and we look very happy there, but we weren't always happy because we were working on consensus and really agreeing on what all of these categories might mean. So I think that made us a very interesting process, because we came from different institutions, different countries, different institutions, and we saw things, we had to really work to see things in a similar way. We're going to look at a thing from the University of Leeds, a description, and I'm going to ask you to look at, to notice what themes that you see. And I will read this, and as I'm reading it, think about the pieces of language that stand out to you as reflecting some kind of theme. All students at the university undertake an autonomous piece of research work known as a final year project as the culmination of their program. This piece of work is seen by students as the pinnacle of their academic achievement, not only because of the academic rigor that is imposed on it by the university, but also because of the control they have to design, carry out, and evaluate what they do. It is often seen to represent the point at which students truly become members of a disciplinary group. So you're looking at this language, and our group came up with these categories: self-directed learning, and the language that led us to that theme was autonomous piece of work, the control they have to carry out, design, and evaluate. You can see this highlighted in green. We had integration and culmination, the culmination of their program in red, academic rigor in blue, the pinnacle of their academic achievement, academic rigor that's imposed on it by the university, the point at which students truly become members of a disciplinary group. So we took all of this language, we actually color coded it using our themes, and it eventually came up with 10 themes that were that we found in these institutions. And I'm doing the number of institutions out of the 55 that had the theme. So obviously, by the nature of capstones, culmination and integration was the most prominent theme. Assessing core competencies was actually in almost half of the institutions. Career, future goals, whether that's future study or a profession, self-directed learning, reflection, academic rigor, ethical responsibility. Some of these showed up only in the US: reflection, ethical responsibility, public sharing, and spiritual and religious life. And a few of them showed up only in Australia and the US. So these are our themes, the 10 themes that we found in our institutional statements. When we looked at these institutional statements, about 5% of them had no themes at all. They just said, we require a capstone. That was it. About 30% of them had one theme, 1 or 2 themes, or some of them had as many as 4 or more themes. So some institutions really laid out quite a few of these goals. I'm going to go through this rather quickly because we're taking quite a bit of time here to get through all this. Culmination and integration, and this was about 2/3 of our institution. I'm going to share some of the language of each of these themes so you can understand how the universities are framing the experience. The senior year represents the culmination of students' curricular experience. Seniors use this time to draw together and synthesize the various threads of study and experience through a variety of intellectual activities, senior seminars, comprehensive exams, theses, projects, performances, and/or exhibitions. So this idea of culmination is actually integral to the required capstone. Another really important theme was core competencies, and this was, Carol has mentioned it, Tania has mentioned it as important in their universities. These courses are designed to allow students to demonstrate their mastery of institution-wide learning outcomes, as well as their achievement of competency in their chosen area of concentration. And this bottom one is from a Australian university. They have graduate capacities, which are similar, I think, in some ways to our general education or institution-wide learning outcomes. These are capacities like critical thinking, communication, ethical consideration, information literacy, research. Career and future goals. Many capstones are described as a bridge to prepare students for the intellectual, ethical, interpersonal, and professional challenges that lie ahead after graduation. Some explicitly use the metaphor bridge. Self-directed learning is also a fairly frequent theme, with more than a quarter of them defining the capstone in this way. It's important for students to learn to work independently. Their students are required to plan, undertake, and report on a scholarly project in an area of their choosing. It's an autonomous piece of research, self-directed final project. So you see this idea of self-directed learning is very important. Reflection was only found in the US sample, and it was actually fairly frequent, with more than a quarter of the US institutions that have a required institutional capstone defining their capstone in this way. The capstone experience invites students to reflect on the entire undergraduate experience, with emphasis on the chosen major and future career, reflect on intellectual development and the nature of knowledge, analyze how their general education program has impacted their understanding of themselves and the world. So we see reflection as being really important here. Academic rigor, this category was for those institutions that really emphasized how rigorous the capstone work was in an academic sense. This endeavor will involve advanced work that addresses a significant issue or problem or theme in your field or in the world. And this is a repeat of the University of Leeds one. It is often seen to represent the point at which students really become members of a disciplinary group. So this is actually a sort of like a crossing point for students when they do this piece of independent research. Several institutions in the US and Australia emphasize application, connecting knowing and doing, hands-on practice, applied real-world experiences. Ethical responsibility is a category that has a lot of facets. It might be personal, social, professional, disciplinary. There were quite a few that talk about the ethical responsibility of doing academic work. As we see in that first quote, adhere to the discipline-specific norms of academic integrity, ethical practices. Students are asked to reflect on ethical issues that are implicit in their project, explore social responsibility, demonstrate engaged citizenship, and reflect on their personal and professional identity and values. This is the 7 institutions in the United States emphasize public sharing or public dissemination. And we see these are in language like, celebration of learning, or, senior capstone day, where there's some kind of public event, or students are actually encouraged to publish either through their, like a repository at the institution. So this first one, at your final year at blank, it's time to show the world how far you've come. You'll complete your major with a capstone course or other advanced academic experience, then present your intellectual achievements through a thesis, recital, performance, or other public presentation. The second quote is from an institution that actually publishes all of their capstone projects in a repository, and they emphasize that researchers and employers from across the globe can read and download the capstone work and see what students have accomplished. I think this last quote really shows how this institution expects students to join the scholarly conversation. And they say, just as we expect scholars and artists to move beyond their fields of expertise and participate in collective activities to help invigorate intellectual life, students are expected to engage in activities concurrent with their capstone project that broaden the scope of their intellectual endeavor and make their skills and viewpoints available to the college and the community at large. Somebody loves that one. That's good. Who did that? All right, great. Oh, Tania, very good. All right, and this last one was only with, in the US, 3 of the universities or colleges actually talk about the capstone in terms of faith journey, like, demonstrating the understanding of the explicit and implicit connections between biblical perspectives and the discipline, or the capstone is about the integration of Catholic Franciscan mission and Rises Values, and the Rises Values is the acronym for their university values. All right, so I want to open it up for just a minute to sort of say, how did that match up? How did these themes match up with your experiences with capstones? You spent a little time writing some things down. Did it match up well? Did we leave anything out that you guys put in your own descriptions?
I have an observation, Janet.
Okay.
Thank you for describing all these. But the one thing that struck me actually it started with the Leeds example, is the last sentence that talked about a student becoming a member of I can't remember the exact phrasing. Yeah. At which point students truly become members of a disciplinary group. And to me, I see that you guys coded it as academic rigor, and I think that's probably true. It is a rigorous way to think about how you apply your thinking and your work to, now you're a part of a agreed upon disciplinary group. But I also see that as a transition from novice, to an expert knowledge. And to me, or a professional identity. And that's a really powerful concept. And I wondered if that was deserving at any point of a category of its own. I realized, you have a number of themes, but to me, it just seems like a really important part of a couple of those descriptions. And I saw it even in your academic rigor description, you kind of include some transition related experiences.
Yeah, I would agree. Chris, you wanted to say something about that? I thought I saw you raising your hand.
Despite how long I've been using Zoom, I still have problems unmuting myself. But I wanted to follow up. I found that as a striking comment as well. And I think, being a little bit more reflective on what we're trying to do with the undergraduate experience in higher education, I think we need to be much more intentional about how we go about doing this. I think one of the things that we're struggling with is that, it is self-directed, it is integration, and it is rigorous. I agree with everything I'm seeing there, but I think we need to do a little bit more in terms of being intentional with this and not thinking that all students are putting all the pieces of the puzzle together the same way. And so I think, the challenge that I'm seeing is how do we better get students to recognize that this is an integrative experience of all of their time as an undergraduate. So what are we doing during their entry year or their first year? What are we doing during their second year experiences? So I think there's opportunities to even do a better job than what we're doing with culminating experiences, capstones across universities. But I did find that statement from Leeds University is like, that's pretty impactful.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Jillian. I do think that part of the reason, with the way these emerging categories came up, we didn't come up with a transition category because that is actually the only piece of language that really struck that transition note. But I think if we had been following the literature, we might have, instead of looking at emerging themes, we might have come up with transition as a theme, because some of these career and future goals could also hit the transition theme.
I think what's interesting related to that is, this is Nancy here, into which community And attention on many campuses is that in many of the majors, the faculty are working almost in the kind of notion of a senior thesis, like a master's, to enter an
Yes.
academic community. This is very true in my field. I don't know if Leslie thinks the same in psychology. You know, we've had a lot of discussions on campus about different majors and how we're positioning them and the academic identity to go on and be really super mini-me's. At the same time, many of them are going into other careers. And so the question is, what kind of community are they entering? And schools actually differ in terms of whether they're bringing them into the academic community of the major or a broader community related to the student's own career goals. And I found that to be one tension that
I agree.
worthy of thinking about.
Yeah, Nancy, just thinking about the University of Leeds, that's one of the things that Dave is actually fighting against with his push to making capstones more inclusive. You know, the traditional view is that you're going to do a kind of a biosciences project that looks like academic research, like your professor's work. And he wants the capstones to maybe be an educational project or an application-based project or a community project, not just an academic. Yeah.
Here, and I will reach out to him because I'm personally very interested in that tension and how we navigate that. And have worked with many campuses on that precise notion. I mean, a second observation that I have, which has to do with framing, is where the language comes from and what it actually means. So when you're coding, I think I saw my institution in there. I think one of your quotes.
Yeah, you were.
Pasted from my university. And it was kind of interesting
did.
for me to go in and double check what we said. And that raised in my mind sort of who the audience is for that. So at my university, just saying it's very much pitched, and even in the positioning, if you did a positioning analysis of the discourse on the student, we're driving student enrollment with that. We're not necessarily saying, like, it reads a little different if you read the catalog version of what a capstone is, something that perhaps I wrote along with a faculty group. So it raises a question. I'm thinking of Leslie's about reflection. So there was one school that said something like the capstone invites students to reflect, blah, blah, blah. I would be curious whether there's anything going on at that university in terms of Leslie's question, do they reflect? I mean, it invites them to reflect, it invites them to integrate. So I guess one of my questions for your analysis is, do you know where some of these themes, like it would be interesting if some of these themes, like the 16 that went career future goals, came out of websites versus catalog or other like who the audience of the document was, because my prediction is that if you see things like career future goals, that's more likely to be in the admissions type hype of a website.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I would agree. Yeah,
Yeah,
in fact, I recognize your university, and there was another one that was so clearly geared towards students. Yeah. But we did look at the official documents and any websites that directly addressed capstones, which, yeah, as you say, is a different audience. Does anybody want to say anything else about, do you see yourself in these themes? Do you see your capstones in these themes?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let me get back to my, so I wanted to spend this last little bit of time we have to talk about like how this language reveals things about motivations, because, you know, doing capstones at an institutional level is really, really complicated work. And I hope that some of you can come to our session this afternoon at 3:30 when we talk about some stories about how capstones get to the point of requiring a a capstone in every major. So the language of these capstone descriptions suggest different motivations. One of them, of course, is attention to student learning. It's clear that institutions see this as a way of helping students learn more and apply their learning and consolidate their learning. The second driver we saw was assessment and accreditation. You can actually see it in the language that institutions are using capstones as a way of assessing and accrediting. And I do think, to your point, Nancy, like I think assessment is a really powerful tool. If we say we're doing assessment, I mean, if we say we're doing reflection, assessment is a way that we can find out, are we doing reflection in our capstones? Another possible motivation is institutional mission, like distinctiveness, having the capstone reflect, who you are as an institution. We thought about some things, and this goes to what Chris was saying. For faculty teaching capstones, I think our research has some impact, some things that you might think about for your own teaching. First of all, does your capstone align with your institutional vision for capstones? Are you defining the capstone in your syllabus, in discussions and assignments? Do you actually reinforce the purpose and the goals of your capstone? This is so easy to become invisible, like what you're actually trying to accomplish. So I think this research actually can help you think freshly about what your capstone is doing, because it reminds you of going back and saying, oh yes, this is really what we're trying to accomplish, and this is our vision, these are our goals, and really thinking about, are you conveying that to students and supporting students so they actually do accomplish those goals? And another thought is this idea of maybe it's time for you to rethink your capstone. Maybe there are other themes from the study that actually might enhance the capstone experience for your students. For example, you might not be doing reflection, but this is something that might enhance something for your students. Or you might not be thinking about like what happens next, or connecting the capstone with the next step that your students actually will be doing. Not everybody is going to become a mini me. So I think that these reflective questions will be interesting for faculty who are teaching capstones. We also thought about how our study might be helpful to institutions that are considering a required capstone. And I think it's really important to think about like what factors are driving your institution's interest, and of course, are faculty involved? Are they part of this drive? How will your capstone fit into the structure? Will your capstone address broad undergraduate learning goals as well as disciplinary? And if it's in the US, will it be a baccalaureate requirement or a gen ed or core curriculum requirement? And one of the surprising things to me was that it was half and half in the US, half baccalaureate requirement and half gen ed or core requirement. And the last question, which themes from this study will best serve your institutional mission? So those are some thoughts we'd like to leave you with. And now we open it up for any questions or further comments. And if you'd like me to go back to a slide, you can let me know and I'll do it. Yeah, Caroline.
I'm just clapping.
Oh, Caroline's just clapping. Great. All right.
Leslie, I think slides are available and recordings. I did hit record this time, so I think that might also be available.
All right. And I know that, yeah, I know that some of you have come in a little bit after we started, so I put the slide up here. These are the themes that we found in the 55 institutions that have a required and institutionally required capstone. All right.
Yeah,
any other?
I do have a question. I don't know if you can answer this. How many of these institutions had multiple themes, and was there sort of a threshold? Did they have 3 themes or 7 themes, or?
Yeah, that I had that right here, or if I can find it. Yeah, there were quite a few. There's a bunch of variations. So some were more focused, just had one theme. and others had just like threw the kitchen sink at it. Yeah. Like you could really tell that some of them had been reading a lot of the literature, and so that they were sort of like, you know, like we're doing all of the capstone, we've read the literature, and this is what our capstone is going to be.
I have a question for you all. What, just to tap into your knowledge, you've been working on this for a long time. Were there themes that you might have expected or hoped to see that were not present in the dominant themes? Like, what was there something missing that you think is quintessential to a good capstone? Or do you feel that the themes you found really captured that?
Well, I can tell you what surprised me. Like the public sharing surprised me, that it came up so frequently, and the spiritual and religious life, I had not thought about that. So those were my surprises. I think that Jillian was surprised that the sort of bridge or transition theme was not more dominant. Did my research partners, anybody want to say anything else that surprised them or you thought was missing?
I don't want to go on a tangent, but what, you know, through this research, the question I keep having, and because of, it may be because of my institutional lens, are we really doing what we say we're doing? So the assessment piece feels like it's missing, missing to me. And, you know, I think Carol has a nice model at Buffalo. There is assessment within the gen ed, but within our gen ed capstone, we have assessment, but within our major, it's optional as to whether or not we attach student learning outcomes to our capstone that are going to be made available to the institution at large. So the assessment piece of this, and are the capstones really doing what we think we're doing, is a piece that's missing for me at this point.
Yeah, and I'm an assessment person at my institution, and I really believe that we, you know, if you don't have the assessment and the accountability and the opportunities from faculty for different institutions to come in and talk to each other and look at each other's work, then you really don't get that kind of university-wide buy-in to a universal, you know, like there's just too much variation, and maybe not enough common vision. Yeah, I think it's, I do believe that it's great for, I would, you know, I think I would love to see, Chris, your institution bring together some capstone projects and sit in a room together and look at them and talk about like, what are you seeing in your student work? I think that would be great.
It's interesting in light of that last set of questions between Carolyn and Christina. I'm doing some interviews of students at the LEAP Challenge schools that worked on capstone and signature work. And you see very clearly that they have a wider definition than this set of themes. That is to say, they're much more focused on integrating their academic and co-curricular than some of these themes reflect. And it was very insightful for me. So they'll be talking about how they related their role on the tennis team or on some student civic work that they did and how those skills came in. So I just thought that was very interesting. And a second thing, Janet, just in terms of public sharing, last night in my talk, I dropped this, but it was a clue to me when I saw very few schools talking about public sharing that there was some kind of problem going on. I mean, actually, that public sharing turns out to be a critical piece to the learning and identity formation. So I'm a little bit disappointed to see that very little research, you know, very little substance in the schools you looked at that have quite a lot going on talking about that piece. It turns out to students that's one of those big bridge pieces when they actually have to own the work and present it beyond the assignment. And so that was interesting to me.
Yeah, and I actually, when you said that about the co-curricular, I could go back to the data and point to probably 3 or 4 institutions that specifically require students to reflect on learning across the whole, their whole educational experience, not just their academic experience. So there are some institutions that are defining their capstone that way. All right, well, it looks like we've come to the end of our time. These slides are available, and let me just get you to the end here to show you. This is our contact information. I'm at the University of Akron. Chris is at Grand Valley. Tania we have our emails all here. We'd love to hear from you. We hope that you read our book. We'd love to see you at our 1 o'clock session this afternoon. So thank you so much for coming, and go Capstones.
Thank you. Great. Excellent work.
Thank you so much.